I'm National University and you're watching TVP World Talks, where every word matters. In February 2022, Russia violated the fundamental principles of international law and human dignity by blundering into the sovereign territory of Ukraine. Almost 3 years, as well as countless war crimes later, Ukraine faces one of the most immense challenges so far as Moscow's forces press relentlessly onwards, committing more war crimes, and as some countries, such as Slovakia, seem to value the Kremlin's favor over neighborly compassion. So how can Kyiv navigate the changing military and political environment of the year 2025? Can this year bring peace? And if so, at what cost? Joining us now is Olexiy Haran, Professor at the National University of Kyiv, Mohyla Academy. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Merry holidays.
So it has been a very long time. I do remember our conversation right before the Russian invasion and shortly thereafter. The shock, the misery of the Ukrainians. And back then, nobody actually knew that this war would last so long. The West, some Western countries, believed it would be over within days, perhaps weeks, but Ukrainians have managed to prevail. What do you think is going to happen in 2025? Are we going to see another year of fighting? Or perhaps, is a resolution around the corner?
Well, unfortunately, I don't see the resolution because of the desire of Putin to continue his attack on Ukraine. I think that he's believing that despite the fact that it's almost soon we mark the third anniversary of the beginning of this full-scale war, so definitely it's not what Putin planned at the beginning, but now it's a war of attrition and Russia is using manpower, its manpower, also manpower from North Korea to continue the war. Russians are moving very slowly. So basically, I would say that one of the most important results of the year is that Ukrainians continue to fight and Russians are moving very, very slowly. But, you know, they are moving. So that's why Putin believes that he may continue it. So in order to stop the war or move to ceasefire, then we need pressure, continued pressure from the West. And I think that in Europe, basically, with exception of Slovakia and Hungary, Europe understands that the war would continue, so it's necessary to do more for Ukraine. But regarding definitely it depends on each country, but the general trend. So, and they're afraid that if the United States would stop support to Ukraine, so in this situation they would do more. But definitely one of the key tools is with the United States, and we don't know how it will evolve under the Trump administration, because there are good signals and there are bad signals. So it's not known yet. So Trump may be harder than Biden, but at the same time harder on Russia. But at the same time, you know, he promised to stop a war. And the question is whether he's going to do it at the expense of Ukraine. This is a danger. Again, we don't know how it will evolve. But look, regarding freezing of the war and regarding potential negotiations, as I have said, at this point, the problem is that Putin doesn't want negotiations. So the only thing to put him on this track is to do more and more pressure on Putin, both in military and economic spheres. But then the question arises, you know, again, what would be the results of potential freezing? Will it mean continued Russian occupation, recognition de facto of continuing Russian occupation of the territories they not only occupied, but they actually annexed them or not. So these all are huge questions. So I would say this is I would say definitely it's not the situation when Russia attacked Ukraine in February 2022, because as you rightly mentioned, most people in the West didn't believe in Ukraine. So now the situation is different, but still it's very, very difficult.
These are some very important questions there. In particular, I think it's worth pointing out what hides beneath the phrase territorial concessions, because some people in the West might think, oh, these are just territories. But this is about the fate of people living there. I mean, Crimea, the Crimean Tatars, pretty much ethnically cleansed, taken away by Russians. Their culture is being destroyed. And also Ukrainians living in all these territories. In many cases, people are executed. People are dying due to unexploded Russian munitions being left around. Is the West basically trying to avert its eyes, pretend like this is not about human lives and, the future of Ukrainians living in these territories, and just trying to say, these are just concessions, these might be necessary? Isn't this taking away the agenda of Ukraine itself?
Well, it's also not easy question, because I think in general, European leaders, and we mentioned exceptions of Slovakia and Hungary, they do understand what's going on the occupied territories. And you are right that actually Russia would use any freezing, to continue pressure on everything Ukrainian on the occupied territory. And the same is for Crimean Tatars in Crimea. But, definitely there would be no official de jure recognition of this position. But de facto, potentially, that's what Putin wants, actually. And now he's blackmailing all the countries in the West. It's nuclear blackmailing. So he would like the West to recognize de facto that these are so-called Russian territories. And this is a danger,
It's even worse than that, actually, because Putin seems to believe that he can impose conditions upon the sovereign country of Ukraine by saying you will not be able to ever join NATO. He doesn't even want to hear about, this 10-year delay. He says he doesn't care. He wants Ukraine never to be able to join NATO. He also says regime change. Like, shouldn't the West ask the question, who gave Putin the right to demand regime change in Ukraine? It's not his territory anymore.
Yeah, the question should be raised by all the countries in the world. And unfortunately, we see that position of many countries in the global south, like Brazil, India, South Africa, that, well, we are neutral in this situation, and behavior of some countries is actually very, very cynical. That we continue to trade with Russia and to receive cheap Russian oil and gas, not to mention China, by the way. So definitely it's not. Look, we may appeal to international law, to the war, unthinkable war in Europe since World War II. But again, for Putin, it doesn't matter. He's going to violate everything. He actually violates everything. So Putin, unfortunately, understands only the language of force. So one way is to mobilize resources, not only in Ukraine, but also in the West, to put pressure on Putin. And the other, is trying to appease him. And you also mentioned about this scenario. I would call it 1938 Czechoslovak scenario, the so-called, notorious Munich Agreement of 1938. which disarmed Czechoslovakia, and it didn't stop aggression at all. We remember British Prime Minister Chamberlain, who arrived to the UK, back to the UK after Munich, and he said, well, I'm bringing peace to you. No. Very soon, you know, Germany occupied the whole Czechoslovakia. So we shouldn't fall in the trap of Mr. Putin. And actually, I would say the only weapon, real weapon in Putin's hand is blackmail, nuclear blackmailing of the West. And so far, I think, well, he's succeeding, you know, in doing that. Because you know, everybody in the West, they are talking, well, we should prevent the nuclear war. This is right. But on the other hand, how can we stop aggressors? So we need to use more tools to stop him. And I think actually what Ukraine is doing right now, because Ukraine now is reaching the aims in Russia proper. And this is very, very important, you know, for us. But to do that, we need to have continued support from the West and also understanding of the West.
Professor Olexiy Haran with a powerful message to the West concerning continued support for Ukraine. Professor, thank you very much for joining us here today and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
And I'm National University of Kyiv. You're watching TVP World. Please do stay with us for more latest news and updates.